Hey, I am Elif Köse, and this is Confidence Leads to Success. I have got a phenomenal woman here with me today, Katie Beardsworth. I read her biography when I invited her to be my guest for this interview series. I was in tears reading it because it really resonated with me. How Katie went through a birth, had a child, had a son like me, and you know what it's like being a new mom. We all have sleep deprivation, having to look after this little human being, and then she lost her mum, and he was only 9 months old, and she had to turn the job 3 months later, and she just realized it wasn't for her. I'm sure many of you have these kind of feelings, that when you go back to work after having a baby, you just realize that it's not for you. And this woman has turned her darkest moment into an opportunity, and she decided to see the light and set up her business and found Polyphony Arts. Hi, Katie, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I didn't want to tell what you do. I would love you to introduce yourself to my listeners because your story is so inspiring and so us. I'm sure so many women will hear themselves in your story, and you are so inspirational, and your confidence is so inspiring. Tell me.
Oh, thank you. Well, what a compliment, and thank you very much indeed for having me on. So yeah, as you've said, I started my business in 2018, and at that point, my son was just over one. And what I'd been through was that, he'd been born, as he said, hadn't slept for a very long time. My mum died when my son was 9 months old, and I was still on maternity leave from a job that had been gradually becoming less and less what I wanted it to be for some time anyway, and perhaps the time to move on had been coming for a while, but it's hard to see that, when you're obviously not self-employed and you're very reliant on things like maternity pay, which is like this sort of distant memory now. It didn't feel like a time in my life that I was going to make a change, but I went back to work. So sort of about 3 months later, so now my son's one. He's gone to nursery. I'm still not sleeping. He doesn't like nursery. I still don't have my mum. And I remember talking to my mother-in-law, who's amazing and lovely, and saying, oh, and at that point I was really, really low and really exhausted. And not really dealing with grief because, I sort of had this idea in my head that I needed to be able to sleep before I could deal with grief. So I just kind of put it to one side. And my mother-in-law actually gave me two really important pieces of advice. One was that you're kind of going to have to deal with the grief one way or another before you can sleep, because you have no control over when the baby's going to sleep. So, you could be in this hiatus for a long time. But the other thing I remember saying to her was that I was like, oh, it's just so weird. I've gone back to work and now I feel like I'm having a delayed reaction to my mum dying. And she just said, well, I mean, it was 3 months ago. I wouldn't call that a delayed reaction. I would call that a reaction. So a lot of perspective came from her then. I kind of powered through the first month back at work. And looking back, I have no idea how I did it because I was working a 9 to 5 job in a university, so going into an office, and my son had done this thing which breastfeeding mums will recognize as reverse cycling, which is because I wasn't there all day, he was doing all his breastfeeding at night. So I was
honestly, I would like women, ladies, please recognize your power, especially who choose to be mothers. Not everybody wants to be moms or can be moms. But I would love you to recognize how difficult it is for a mum to actually, because you're not only responsible for a little human being, but you are also responsible for your being. And then you're also responsible for a job that you were designated or applied you decided to have a baby and you want to continue that because that's your also passion, and you are actually trying to control three things at the same time, and on top of that having to deal with grief of your parent is a heartbreaking. But I love Katie, what she said just before we started recording. She was telling me how she was looking to see what life was trying to teach her. That is a lesson. Tell us a bit more about that, Katie.
Sure. So basically after that first month back at work, we went on holiday, and on that holiday, when I stopped trying to do all of those things all at the same time, I was like, well, this just isn't working. This isn't going to get better with anyone getting used to it. It's just not working. And I realized that,
what was that feeling? Because I'm sure so many listeners will have that. I am at work. I'm back to work after having my maternity leave. And I don't know, what was that exact feeling and moment that you said, this is it?
It was when I sort of stopped, because I think you go into this sort of powering through, you sort of think, right, well, this is a transition, I'm just going to keep doing it and eventually it'll become easier. And I had this idea before I had my son that, at some point my life would go back to what it was before, which was me being me, having a job plus a child. And I actually don't think that really happens.
You think it's so easy, you think you can still do things. Oh no.
And so I went on this holiday and my son was teething and he was, still not sleeping, but nonetheless we had some space, and I just thought, you know what, these are not temporary. The fact that he wasn't settling in well to nursery, I was like, oh, that my mum dying really taught me that, that life is short and that you have to do the things that you want to do at the time. And I was like, the job that I'm doing now is not worth the anguish of putting my son into a nursery that he doesn't want to go to. And so I thought, right, it just doesn't balance out. I'd rather be at home with him. I'd even more rather have a balance of doing something that I really love doing and also looking after him. So I was like, right. And this sounds decisive and it sounds, like I was making this great decision, but actually at the time it almost felt like I had no other choice. I was like, well, I've got to try and improve things for myself sometimes. It's always like that thing that you have when you're in a very stressful situation and you can only control the things that you can control. So I couldn't control the fact that my mum had died, and I couldn't control the fact that I wasn't sleeping, and that I couldn't control the fact that my son didn't like nursery, but I could control what I was doing. So I was like, right, and I took some time to think about it, but essentially I never really went back to work after that. I took some time off sick, and because I was, sick, knackered, and I had.
I hear you, honey. I hear you.
And it's funny, I almost had an embarrassment admitting that I'd taken time off work for all of these things. Anyway, so I took some time off and had a think, and then in the end, early the following year, I left. So this was very early 2018. I left and started doing some freelance work. So I'd always worked in music. And so I had quite a very good network of contacts. And I knew some people who knew that I was thinking about going freelance and had said, I'd like you to manage my ensemble. I'd like you to do some work for my festival and so on. So I had a couple of very part-time clients that I essentially took on, and took my son right back down to like 2 mornings at nursery a week, I think, and just eased him right back in. And then we went up to 1.5 days and eventually 2 days, and really eased him in. So I felt more like I was in control of his happiness, my happiness. And
I just want to make a little note here, Katie, because what you said is very important, ladies. You take the control of the controllables. If there are things that you can't control, don't waste your energy, your time, and your effort, because this is a golden nugget. This is a real secret of a successful entrepreneur, because what Katie has done, yes, there are things that she wanted to control, but there's like, you have to admit to yourself that you can't control everything. And then once you establish and clarify those, it makes your life so much easier. Oh, so exciting. Okay.
Yeah, I know that I have to say that is something that I completely live by. It's like, can I control this? No.
Very clear, very simple, very simple. Yeah. But yet we seem to forget, can we control this? If I can't control that, what about if I adjust my life around the things that I can control, and uncontrollables can be the way they are, so I don't feel overwhelmed? Because that overwhelming feeling is actually puts a lot of entrepreneurs off, and actually they give up on the first year or not even that long.
And as women, well, I mean, as people, but I think particularly as women, there are a lot of uncontrollable things that we worry about. We worry about things that happen to our children, regardless of whether we can control them or not. We worry about, I mean, I worry about sort of like friends and other women and people doing difficult things, like having children under difficult circumstances. And I worry about women in Afghanistan and all sorts of things that I can't control. So it's not that I don't worry about them, but I do find a lot of peace comes from being like, right, well, I'm going to really focus my problem solving attention on the things that I can control, because because that's all you can really do, in my opinion. So yeah, I then having started doing this, I then built it up really slowly, and it's quite interesting because I do feel like, with this interview being called Confidence Leads to Success, I would say that I didn't really feel like I had confidence that was leading to success at any point up until a lot later. So I spent the whole of the first year kind of bumbling through, dealing with the clients that I had, accruing new ones.
But if you asked people around you who you work with, or who followed your journey and watching your journey, would they say you had confidence?
Well, they probably would. And I found a lot of my confidence, or my sort of resolve in building this for myself, came from networks of other business people, and especially women and parents doing this as well, because we have this impression of business people as being very together, very, driven and focused, and not having complicated lives, which I can confirm is definitely not the truth.
I will second that.
Yeah. And I remember I said to my dad when I said that later, about a year later, or just under a year later, this had expanded to the point where I needed to start taking on a team to help doing the work. And I was going, right, I'm going to formalize it. I'm going to name it. Because at this point I didn't have a name. I didn't have a website. I didn't have anything like that. I said, I'm going to do all this stuff. And I spoke to my dad and said, I'm getting a business coach. I'm going to, make this a business. I'm going to do it properly. And he went, oh goodness, but if you're the CEO of a business, won't you end up working 24/7 and so on and so forth? And I was like, well, no, because this is exactly the thing. And this was the same, we've all seen that, haven't we, modeled that's what it takes to run a business. And I said, no, I've specifically found a business coach that is all about working less and earning more, and is all about making sure that we don't
it's all about your leadership skills and how you can manage a team, that you don't live to work.
Exactly. And making sure that you're working in a way that suits your life and your family and everything that you want. That is the single most empowering thing that I've ever done in my life, is to build a business that suits me like that. And I am really proud of that. And thank you. And it's really lovely to be invited on an interview of this topic, and to kind of reflect on this. But I find it really important, because at the time when I was trying to make this decision as to whether, a still fairly exhausted, grief-ridden mum could in fact have a business that was more than just me sort of doing things, I was looking at organizations then Pregnant Then Screwed, and the kind of network of amazing influential women on Instagram that kind of circles that organization. That's how I kind of came to this. And I remember I saw all these examples of people living very, very complicated lives, not losing themselves in their business, not having to become a hard-nosed CEO that doesn't care about things anymore, and only cares about, profit margins and so on and so forth. And I remember I had everything fairly poised. I had the website kind of quasi ready and the name chosen and everything. And then I went to the Pregnant Then Screwed conference. This was in January 2019, and I went with a friend and spent the whole day on the verge of tears. This is being in this room full of people who are just like me. And then the next day I literally went home and just like pressed launch on the website. I was like, right, this is it. This is like what I do now. Because I'd been applying for jobs the whole way through the first year, you know, thinking maybe I needed to do something else. And so you asked me about this feeling of, you know, these moments where the universe is trying to tell you something. I kept applying for jobs that I was theoretically perfectly qualified for, always getting interviews and so on, and then just never quite making it to the final cut. And I thought, well, and then actually this was something that my dad said to me, was he said, you know, you've got to go where, you know, you're being told something here. You know, it's like, go where the work is easy. Because I was going, oh, I never get these jobs, but I've got people who want to work with me on a freelance basis coming out of my ears. They keep coming and going, can you do this? Can you do that? And he was like, maybe you should just do that. Because that's what,
Follow the omens
coming easily to you. And I was like, oh yeah.
It's so good that you just, what I've noticed in your story, that you have started offering your service with your network. Networking, I always tell to my clients, my friends, and anyone who starts their businesses, the networking is very important. It's one of the most important part of your business. And you have used your network to start building your business. There was not even a name for your business. All you had was your service, and you spoke to the right clients and they asked your help. And then your website followed afterwards, and the name and everything. So this is very important. I was a bit like you as well. I didn't actually have a name for my business when I first started. I didn't even have a website when I first started. And somebody, one of my ex-partner's friends, said to me, do you have a website? And I thought, do I supposed to have a website? That's how naive I was. So the reason I'm making a little point on this section, Katie, is because a lot of new starters seem to be spending so much time and effort and money on branding. I'm not saying it's not important. It's so important. It's very important. But unless you establish what you offer, how you can help people, your brand's name, colors, your website, and how pretty it is not going to help people. What's going to help people, your passion and your clarity in your service. You really need to be able to tell people what you do with one sentence.
Yeah, and I think I find this interesting as well, because I also know that that really excellent branding is very important, but it is also for people who are thinking, could I ever be an entrepreneur? Could I do this, that, or the other? That is another thing that I think people look at and go, oh, goodness, it all looks so glossy. I could never, get to that point. And actually, so I originally named my business Beardsworth Arts after myself, and then quickly changed my mind about that. And the same year, relaunched it as Polyphony Arts.
So imagine if you had spent all that money.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the other thing was that, so I've always been someone that struggles to name things, hence calling it after myself originally. And when I came up with the name Polyphony Arts, I hadn't decided that I was going to rebrand it. I just loved the name, and it sort of popped into my head one day, because my business is all about, it's a music consultancy. So I represent artists, I organize festivals, do fundraising and so on and so forth. But the sort of underneath all of that, what I was noticing was that the musicians I was working with had lives similar to mine, that had caring responsibilities, that had complex freelance work schedules, that had lots of different strands to them. And the word polyphony in music means the bringing together of complex strands, different tunes, different melodies, etc., into like a harmonious piece of music.
Oh, I love that. Such a meaningful.
Yeah. And so when I sort of, the name came because I saw what my business was becoming, and I thought, this is I really love that. And then from there, I worked with a great branding designer who I kind of talked to about all this, and she came up with my branding, which is all kind of like a range of different colors, like all kind of merging together into this thing and into this sort of circle of you know, harmony or unity or whatever. And I just think it was like really nice to be able to say, this is what my business is all about, and then also to work with someone excellent who was like, and I can represent this in graphic form and in branding form. And that has ended up with me being really happy with my branding. But as you said, it has come from a place of understanding of what my business is, rather than
you had to kind of walk the walk a little bit to understand. It's just almost like living in a house. You know, when you buy a house, they say you got to live in it before you start doing any work, because then you realize where you get the most sunshine and where do you really want to spend the most time and where the family usually gathers, and accordingly you invest your money in that section. So business is a bit like that. You have to live in it. You have to understand what your really offerings are. And I remember at the beginning I had so many things that I was offering, and I still offer those parts within my business, but I don't put so much effort, or I don't talk about it in publicly, because I wanted to establish myself in one part. I call it my flagship service, and then add the other bits as a side that I don't talk about. So it's really good that you talked about these, because a lot of people, when I started with less than £300, and I never had bank loans, never had investors. Nobody even gave me a bit of cash loan to use to set up my business. I literally started from nothing, and I built it organically to where it is right now. And one of the reasons, even though I had been told, you are new once, no. You can, I mean, even Chanel relabeled, redesigned their logo. You can be new again and again. You can, because we invent ourselves, we learn, and we evolve. As we evolve, our brands and businesses evolve. So it's very important, these entrepreneurs, to not so much dwell on these first starting, and give themselves at least 6 to 8 months, which is what you've done. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. There's a lot of pressure in trying to conceive what a business is going to be like before you've been really doing it, isn't there? And I'm the same. I have services that I thought that I sort of designed and a few people have used, and they're still available, but they're not. I've later discovered that
shout about them.
No, I don't. You know, I don't invest marketing time into them, because they're just sort of there if anyone needs them. And actually, I've realised that people really overall want something else from me, and that's what I spend the time on. So yeah, and I think that's
brilliant. It's coaching helps. Business coaching helps. I always tell, it's the experience that makes you closer to your dream life and dream income, dream lifestyle. And if you don't have the patience and energy and money to waste to build the experience, which took me 12 years. And that's why I started business coaching, because I thought, what if I shared all this I know and reverse engineer it and share it with these women who are creatives, who want to turn their passion into a brand like me? How much money and time they would save. And I would have loved to have someone on my side at the beginning, because like I said, and you just don't know where to put your marketing money, where to put your energy. And I had so many time wasters and so many things that my energy was divided. But once you have a clear plan and clear strategy, it's very important.
Yeah, I completely agree. Business coaching has been the best investment I've made in my business, apart from possibly my team. But actually, the two go side by side. Really, you wouldn't really have one without the other. But and because it, as well as the actual, it gives you that. I don't think that I would take the time to reflect on my business in the same way if I didn't have a business coach. Because you do, you know, they're like, my coach will ask me like one question, and I'll spend a week going, and reflecting, and you know, making plans.
Having the expert opinion. Sometimes we don't see it, even if we say something can light up another bulb in your head. It's very important. So what have you got brewing for our listeners that we could follow you and see what you are creating for the music
Ah,
world?
well, I have a podcast called Music Works, which you can find on any podcast platform, which is about it's about the music industry and what it's like to be in it, essentially. And we cover a lot of things to do with to do with fairness and equality, diversity, inclusivity, and what it's like to be a parent in the industry, what it's like to be, and there's a sort of a micro podcast section which is to do with sort of business and industry tips for musicians.
Excellent.
Yeah, and then I do strategic career coaching for musicians, and also, as I say, I manage artists' performing careers, composing careers, and festivals, organisations, that kind of thing. Pretty much a
Fantastic.
one-stop shop for
What
art
would be
management.
your one strategy tip for anyone who's in music industry wants to turn their passion into a paying hobby? I
Great,
don't know
great
how to
question.
explain it.
My tip would be to essentially to decide what your unpopular term but unique selling point, or like key desires are for your music making, and to channel that as much as possible into what people see of you, and not to worry about being niche, because I think that a lot of confidence issues with musicians come from feeling like it's very difficult to own a space in which, classical music in particular is largely a historical discipline. And so, one might say there are only so many pianists that you need who play Chopin, for instance. But it's about finding your space within the industry, within the career, and really owning that. And I think that essentially is the key thing that
So
can make.
find your voice rather than
Yeah,
find your niche.
exactly.
Be
Find your
authentic.
what you're going to add to the space.
I love that. Love that. Thank you, Katie. It's been so good to have you. I
Pleasure.
love your story, and I love how you are on a mission to help people in music industry to make a difference in their business life and create a space and elevate them. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Well, likewise, I find your story very inspirational, and it's been a real honor to be on this podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Katie. Great. Have a lovely day, and I will catch you soon. We'll share all your information on the interview notes so people can
Brilliant.
reach out to you and take your expert advice.
Thank you so much.
It has been really wonderful to have Katie on our podcast this week, and such a wonderful story to listen. And there were so many little golden nuggets to take away to run your business successfully or even start your business. There is so many parts that is important for every business, but what is important is your pace and your budget and your skill set and where you want to put your energy within your lifestyle. And I'm so pleased that Katie has shared all her story from beginning till end, really, with us, with all the details and how she made a decision to how she has turned it into a brand that it is now. But she didn't really rush into making decisions and investing money in branding and marketing before she was 100% sure that was what she wanted. So it's very important for you to apply these to your business, because what's the point of wasting money? Know exactly what you want. What do you want is the answer, question to answer, for you to get a clear plan for your life and for your business. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you on the next episode. Take care. Bye.